Hello, everyone. We are just going to give it a couple of seconds. I know it takes a moment or two for folks to log in, do a little transferring. I don't know. How was everybody's 3-day weekend? Because I'm like, it's already Wednesday, folks. It's already Wednesday. All righty, guys. So if this is your first time with us, hello, my name is Sadie Uribe, and I'm the media producer for the Los Angeles Regional SBDC. The SBDC is a national program with over 1,000 locations across the country, helping to stimulate economic growth through business advising and development. The LASBDC offers no-cost services through funding provided by the U.S. Small Business Administration, SBA, and from the California Office of the Small Business Advocate. It's your tax dollars at work. Let's see. Oh, how good. Please stand by, folks. We're having some technicals over here. Here we go. The Los Angeles Regional SBDC Network operates 7 service locations throughout Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. Our services are also offered virtually. We are here to help. We empower small business owners by offering tailored solutions through personalized one-on-one business advising, cutting-edge workshops, and comprehensive programs, all provided at no cost. We are dedicating to supporting your entrepreneurial journey every step of the way. Lori, I tell you, it is never a dull moment with us, right? We keep you
No,
on your toes.
never a dull moment. And I see everybody in the chat had a great weekend. I had 4 days away and it was awesome. And when I went outside, it feels fall in the air. Does everybody else feel like it's fall? And does anybody else go like, how did we get here? What happened to the summer? I feel like I totally missed it. Okay, with no further ado, we have so much to do today. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, first, as far as September goes, I got a whole long list of webinars, the usual ones. And as always, Sadie's going to put all the links into the chat. I am keeping the cash flow model again this month. Don't know if I'll have it next month or not. Kind of waiting to see. But here's the big lineup for September. Speaking of September, we have a huge lineup. Actually, Megan's on today, so I should have taken that one off today. Next week, I've got Dahlia coming on. Dahlia's one of the favorites, so many of you guys just love her. She's from DF Accounting Services. I wanted her to come and talk about some of the adjusting journal entries. That's a word that scares people right away. Adjusting journal entries that you need to do even if you're just downloading the data into accounting software, because many of these are being missed. We talked about this 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago with Max. If you have one of those loans through something like, the merchant loans is what they're called, where they're actually paying you back after they extract the money. If you don't do an adjusting journal entry on that, you're reporting revenue improperly. If you have to deal with the CalPERS at all, you've got to do an adjusting journal entry. There's many things that isn't just a, let's say, slam dunk from downloading your data into the accounting software. And many of the bookkeepers aren't doing it as well. So I wanted Dahlia to talk about that, as well as a million other things we always talk about. The following week, we got Ariane coming on from Pop Art Studios. And this is a really interesting story. I knew the story from the beginning. Pop Art Studios is a paint and sip company. And it's a fascinating story of how she went from bartending to creating the company and now is looking at another whole new experience in her life. And then the last week of September, another beautiful human, Lynn Cooper, is coming on, who has abundant energy. She's a Reiki healer. Corporate past, new directions. That's kind of the theme for this month. That is always an underplay in so many of our lives, but it actually is coming into full focus this month with our 3 entrepreneurs all taking different changes within their life. And so I wanted to really start this month with my Lori's Corner. Instead of talking about the IRS and legal structures, I want to talk today about adapting to change and what we could call as business resilience. Now, this is kind of, once again, the Lori's Corner, the Lori's perspective on things. If you were to do a Google search, on adapting to change. And I, who did a lot of advising 20 years ago before I was the finance guru, I did a lot on change management, went into companies as I was looking at them and tried to change the culture, et cetera, to adapt to the new financial plans, et cetera. Was very involved in change management for a long period of my career. And there were common thought always had certain things that you kind of knew that you needed to do. You had to, invest in technology, stay up on technology, foster innovation, have a culture of change. I got a chance to actually speak to some people in HP when they were going through all the change in management a good 25 years ago. And if you foster innovation and foster a culture of change, they always say you need strong relationships with your employees and with your customers. And the list goes on and on. And I actually did that this morning, Googled to see if anything is new, but it's always the same things that we have an awareness of. Well, this begs the question, if it's always the same things, it's kind of a small list. Why is it that we have such a hard time changing? And I think this is an important discussion because I wrote an article. Let's explain it this way. I wrote an article some time ago where I said business models are like sandcastles. And what I was referring to is you play as a kid, you make the sandcastle, and then the waves come in from the ocean and it wipes it away in a matter of no time. And a business model, when I was young, it could stay throughout many generations. But today, technology could make your business model or your business, however you want to look at it, be extinct within a matter of a year, yet alone a whole lifetime to pass it on to your kids, right? So if we have to adapt and we have to make change and we have to have business resilience and we know these things, why is it we're still stuck? So I'm going to give you my personal perspective on this. It's a whole different list, completely whole different list than you're going to get on a Google search under business knowledge. The first thing I believe, from my experiences of consulting with entrepreneurs on a daily basis for 3 decades now, the very first thing is you have to have an awareness of reality. Most people like to live in their delusional ignorance. Oh, the customers are going to come back. They're going to pay the amount. This isn't going to really affect us. So you have to have an awareness of the reality. You can't be delusional about it. Once you have an awareness, you have to accept the situation. Okay. The company was great. It worked for a while or it never worked, but it's not working now. So you have to accept it. You have to be willing to change. You have to be willing to change. You have to say, okay, I have an awareness, I accept it, and I'm willing to do it. And I think, in my personal perspective, and you guys can put in the chat whether this resonates with you or not, I think the underlining thing that keeps people stuck is they don't engage in any belief that there could be something different, a hope for tomorrow. It's like they get stuck saying, this is all, it's the best it'll ever be. I got to hold on to this. Once you can have a belief that there could be something different, you start to go, well, maybe I'll close this company down and do this. I think it's the belief in something different, a hope for tomorrow. When that finally resonates with you is when you take action and you're willing to let go, right? So when we look at this, my personal philosophy on this, and I've learned it from my own experiences, I don't try to ever look for better. And I don't even look at worse. I don't even use those words in my vocabulary anymore. I say, what new experiences are there? What new experiences can I seek? And my career's been that. Well, I'm kind of bored with this, or this isn't working so well. Well, what new experiences do I want? What new experiences do I want to bring into my life? And when I do that, I see a belief come out. I see a hope for tomorrow. And then by default, it always seems to allow me to make change, and it always brings abundance. So those are my words of wisdom on adapting to change. Speaking of which, I'm very excited to introduce my guest today, Meegan Johnson, the founder and CEO of Stratavera, a consulting firm that helps small business owners turn messy, stressful selling. I know you guys feel that way about selling, stressful selling into clear, repeatable systems for growth. Megan's a seasoned sales leader who's been in the thick of it, selling services, building teams, and figuring out things the hard way. With 25 years of experience growing businesses of all sizes, she knows what actually works and what's just noise. I love that, Megan. I love that introduction. And entrepreneurs, for the most part, not all of them, but many of them, are scared to death of selling.
100%. Nobody usually says, I want to start a business so I can sell. They want to be the best plumber. They want to be the best accountant. I want to do better by my clients. I'm not a salesperson. I don't want to sell things.
I know. And I was a salesperson early on in my career. And, well, actually, I always say I started out selling with my grandfather on the farmer's market. We would sell $3 bean bushels, and I was out in the front at 9 years old, $3 for the
Like the
beans.
carnival barker.
Yeah, exactly, totally.
$3
But
beans, $3 beans.
I think when people get into sales, it's not so much they love the sales process, they like the money that gets comes from a sales
That's usually
career.
what happens.
I never
You
thought
can
of
pay your
that.
rent.
Yeah, you do. It's like you can pick it up quick, and if you're good at it, you can make some money. So, but
You mean
that
you don't believe I wanted to be a chief revenue officer when I grew up?
I know, I know. I never, really said, "Oh, I just love cold calling. There's nothing I want to
So
do with
much
cold
fun.
call." Yeah, no.
Bugging
So,
strangers at dinner time.
people that don't want to talk to you and forcing them and trying to get them to want to talk to you. But anyway, let's go back in time. Let's find it. Megan, in high school, did you say, "Hey, I want to go up and be an expert in sales"? Where were you thinking your trajectory was going to lead you?
Yeah, definitely not into sales. And I think like a lot of people in sales, I got in it for the money. Whenever people ask what I wanted to be when I grew up, the only answer I can ever think of is Indiana Jones. That's what I wanted to be. Indiana Jones. I
Love
wanted
that.
adventure. I wanted travel. I love history. But I don't think a lot of academics get to necessarily like run around in the jungle with whips. So,
Yeah.
and I had to grow up and pay bills, and sales was an easy way to do that. Um, and I think a lot of people in college or coming straight out of school, you'll oftentimes hear people's first job was like a telemarketing job or something like that because they could get some work experience and make some money.
I know, and I had one time, well, several times I would have while I was teaching at USC and Pepperdine, the undergrad, they would ask me, what do I think was the best career to start out? And I would say, get a sales job, and the harder the widget is to sell, the better off you are. That will prepare you for entrepreneurship.
100%, because it creates a level of tenacity that most of us, you know, didn't necessarily grow up with, right? School teaches you a lot about following rules, getting an A. Sales is a little bit more flexible. You have to exercise your, intuition, your curiosity, and tenacity, learning how to not take things personally all the time. And there's not a lot of early, I think, starter careers that can really teach you to do that the way that sales can. My career, I started in retail.
Okay, I was going to ask, before you go into that I think it's just fascinating what you just said. I mean, I was aware of it, but I never thought about it in that content. So if you think about being disciplined, being a self-starter, and having a thick skin,
Mhm.
those are really good skills, and a sales job will get you there or you will not succeed. You just will not.
Right.
Yeah,
And
that's
you
fascinating.
you have to you have to have those qualities as an entrepreneur, or you wind up gaining those qualities as an entrepreneur, because when it's your baby, when it's your own business, it's so personal, right? It's not the company anymore, it's me. And being able to kind of move through that when you do get a rejection from a prospective client, or you do have to overcome a business hurdle, or the bank won't give you that loan until you have accomplished XYZ, right? The ability to power through that, the discipline to kind of power through that, you can learn a lot of those skills, early on in sales jobs.
Yeah, because when you're selling for another company, you may believe in the property or the product or service, I meant to say, but you don't have this emotional connection where if somebody says, your product stinks, you don't go, oh, but
Well,
when
it's
you're
not,
well, you know,
I didn't build the widget. They built the widget, right?
that's
Or,
what I call it. Yeah. So when you become an entrepreneur and suddenly it's your baby, it's so much harder to disconnect. It's harder to say, no, I need that selling price. And you end up belittling yourself on the price too. So not having a relationship with the company at first in that capacity is really a way to
yeah.
grow those skills. I didn't even think about all this. It was just so interesting. It was a play on how selling careers help entrepreneurship in a way I had never done before. But going back, so you were in retail. What did you learn in retail sales? I never did retail sales.
So I got my first job at 15 and I was so proud of myself because I made 400, sorry, I made $4 an hour. I didn't have to flip burgers and it wasn't hot and sweaty. And I sold like high-end menswear, like $400 men's sweaters at a
Oh,
mall.
wow.
And I learned some of the real fundamentals. I was trained by a lot of women in retail that knew a lot more about how to talk to people than I did. And that's one of the things I learned was how to talk to people, how to approach strangers. We all grew up, don't talk to strangers, right?
Yeah.
That is something that we actually, it's a knee-jerk reaction that we have to overcome. So how to walk up, just even in a retail environment, they walked in the door, you still have to go up and say, hi, can I help you? And the other big thing is learning the difference. And I harp on this so much because it's such a fundamental thing in sales, learning the difference between a feature and a benefit. A
Yeah.
feature is what it does. The benefit is what it does for the client, right? And we so often kind of lean on features like it slices, it dices, think of an infomercial. I can do all these things for you, but we don't always make the obvious statement of tying that back to the person we're talking to. And that's like for me one of the core fundamentals of sales and one of the easiest things to overlook. And I got that really early on in my career, just kind of drilled into me by how they taught me how to sell a sweater, right? And I was able to pivot that into other things.
It's interesting. I haven't heard the words feature and benefit in so long. However, going through any corporate sales training, which I did, I sold Canon copiers for a while, by the way.
That's a
But
fun one.
yeah, it was, and I did it because I had moved from one state to another, and I didn't want to get passionate and caught up in a career type thing, and so it would just give me time to settle and start my business again, right? So I thought, how
Mhm.
in the world are you going to get passionate about a copier, right? And so that was my theory, but I ended up making six figures selling copiers. It's amazing how much money you can make in sales. But anyway, going back to the feature and benefit, that is something that is drilled into you when you take any official sales training. But if you
Mhm.
hadn't taken sales training, you wouldn't be as aware of that. And I think so often because the entrepreneurs think about the mechanics, let's just call the word mechanics of what it is, their product or services, they don't think about the benefit and necessarily communicate the benefit as skilled as a professional trained salesperson would. Thoughts on that?
I think that's 100% true. And I also think we get in our own heads about justifying our skill set, right?
Yes.
Because, when you're an entrepreneur, like we were saying, when it's your baby, most of us, there's no harsher critic of ourselves than ourselves. And so we're put into a situation where we're pitching and we're talking about our business. We usually start just kind of going down this rabbit hole of, I've got this much experience. I've been in business this long. My product or my service does this and this and this because we kind of put ourselves in this position where we're trying to impress upon them that we're as good as we say we are, or we're better than the other guy, right? And when we do that, unfortunately, most people's response, they may hear part of it, but eventually, whoever you're talking to tends to check out because they're hearing a lot of me and at the end of the day, most of us, when we're looking for something, we want a value, we want a benefit. We're looking for another sales acronym, the WIFM, the what's in it for me. And when you are pitching or when you are selling, you have to kind of say, I can do X, Y, Z. What this means to you is here's the benefit, right? And it's like, and it's easy if you write it out on paper. You can do like, what's my feature and what's the benefit to my client? But then you have to get really good at being able to just say that in a random conversation when you're at your kid's soccer practice and someone says, well, what do you do? Right?
Yeah.
Oh, we use an accounting firm. We've been having some challenges with them. How are you different? You don't want to kind of go down the path of, well, I'm really good at this and I'm really good at that and I'm really good at this. You want to tell a story of what you do for your clients and how it benefits them. So,
So true. You know, what I finally learned, and I learned this through my company as well, is that I would always think, what is causing people to stay up at night worried and then get up
mhm,
in the morning, it's still on their mind. And I talk about this because it was such a classic example. I was doing a lot of teaching to larger companies, and I was teaching financial information. So I had it, know your profitability, because that's what CFOs spoke about. So then I took the class to smaller companies, and I had know your profitability, and nobody like signed up. They didn't even know what I was talking about, right? So I asked
well,
that,
why do I care?
yeah, why
Right.
do I care? I asked that question, what do they stay up at night worried about it? And I realized their company failing. And so I
Mhm.
wrote a new headline, same body copy. Are you afraid your company will fail? Tons of signups. So if you just ask the question, what are people staying awake at night worrying
Mhm.
about or getting up in the morning worried about? That leads you, I think, to the benefit. Your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Buying is emotional, and we like to think that we're all these very logical beings. And when I'm not trying to pick on accounting firms, but when I'm hiring an accounting firm, I'm looking at what services they provide and what that costs me, and am I getting the most bang for my buck? But the reality is I am usually looking for peace of mind. I'm worried about getting audited. I'm worried I can make payroll every month during my slow season, right? Things like that. We are just all emotional creatures. We also tend to buy from people we like,
Yeah.
right? So, do I trust this person? And that trust isn't always established by how many years they've been in business. That trust is usually established by, do they understand what scares me? And if they can identify with me, I can identify with them, and I'm more likely to buy something from them. So, but emotion, no matter what you're buying, it could be a copier, it could be something super dry, but it's definitely emotional. Look at cars. Cars are a great example. A car gets you from point A to point B, but there's this whole marketing world behind putting emotion into buying a car. Do you want safety? Do you got to fit the kids? Do you want to look sexy? It's not always about which product meets your needs the most. It's also, how does it address your concerns or make you feel?
Okay, I can't go without commenting on this. Speaking of cars, so one time they had this article and it was like, what are you compared to the car you drive, right? And this is when I was still in LA, right? And I had this little, I was so proud of it. I had this little, I bought it used after my MBA, but it was a 280 SLK Mercedes, right?
Nice.
So I look it up to see, because I'm going to be sexy, right? I think I'm going to be sexy because you said that, right? And it said, middle-aged woman trying to look young.
Ouch.
No, I was like,
You're
ouch,
like,
that hurt.
"Ah."
It's like the truth really hurts. But I want to go back to something else that you mentioned. I always take my little notes. That's why you see me looking here. But something,
I do have to say, I want to be Prince's little red Corvette, but the wheels came off that a long time ago.
I know, I know. I drive my Jeep. I love my Jeep. I'm not getting rid of my Jeep now. That's the thing I love. You mentioned something that I think is a huge nugget that needs to be brought to the surface and talked about a little bit. And it's the fact that as humans, we are always trying to justify. We're always trying to justify. And we wear our concerns and our fears and our lack of confidence, our insecurities on our sleeve, right? And I think entrepreneurs are the worst about that. And so when they sell, they're trying to sell to themselves, and the person they're selling to can pick up on that. Have you noticed this? Can we just talk about this? Because I know there's a bunch of people in the audience that maybe even unconsciously and subconsciously can relate to what I just said.
So I've been in sales for 25 years. I am a sales consultant. I teach people how to do this, but as an entrepreneur, I still have to tell myself to get out of my own head and get out of my own way, because it is emotional.
Yeah.
So in what you're saying, how do we do that? years ago, there was a woman that I knew that was a speech coach, and she said something very simple, which is like when you're networking, when you're talking about people, try to forget that you exist. It's like forget about you, ask
Yeah.
about them. And I think I took that to heart, and the way I've applied that is I don't, in a sales process, I don't lead with talking about how great I think I am, right? I'm not trying to justify because you do end up in a position where you look less confident. Like, you know, methinks the lady doth protest too much. I'm like
I
going
love that
on
saying.
about my experience, right? And it's like, who cares?
Right.
But I control the conversation, which makes me more confident by asking about them. Like you said, what keeps you awake at night? Tell me about your business. Tell me why you started your business. The discovery phase of selling, the asking all those questions, it does several things. One, you are controlling the conversation. You do feel more confident. You're making it about them. They think that you care more because chances are you do, right? Again, we go into these businesses because we want to help people do something better. We want clients to have better experiences than we've experienced. And it also does stop you from kind of doing the it slices, it dices approach to selling yourself. Once you've done really good discovery with them, you've pulled out a lot of information, and we can go down the rabbit hole of why you want that information and uncovering pain. Um, but then usually they're going to ask, so tell me more about you and your business. So how would you address my situation? What they're really saying is, how can you take away my pain? How are you going to soothe my fears? And that's a much better situation to be in. And again, you've kind of forgotten about yourself. You're so focused on them that a lot of those fears of, and those confidence challenges, they tend to go away because you've kind of gone into problem solving mode by the time you're talking about yourself.
Yeah, and I was going to actually mention exactly what you just said is then you switch over from trying to justify your existence and your company existence to having like a curiosity
Right.
about their situation. And then you are starting to delve into your expertise to problem solve, like you said, and that puts you in a completely different mindset and that allows you to shine in these situations.
100%, because then you're their champion, right?
Yeah.
And there's a ton of books out there about needs-based selling. If you've been put through, a strong corporate training program, needs-based selling comes up a lot. But again, most of us haven't. And even throughout 25 years in sales, I've worked in everything from Fortune 150s to very tiny companies that I was growing. And you know, uh, early on in my career, I learned a lot of this through osmosis and watching successful salespeople because there's just not a lot of sales training out there. You can't go to college and get a degree in sales, those types of things. So, um, but some of it's intuitive. It's not necessarily rocket science. I think selling is just intimidating because we have this concept of, you know, the car salesman. No one likes to buy. We want cars, but none of us we want to feel sexy. But but none of us want to buy a car because we're so afraid that someone's going to shove something down our throat, right?
It's so true. It's so true. So here, I've got a statement I'm going to make, and you give me your opinion on it. A
Sure.
lot of times when people think of a salesperson, they think that they're an extrovert, they love people, they love gatherings, they're very social, etc. And this, I think, also then scares a lot of entrepreneurs who don't see themselves as that. I don't believe that's necessarily true. I think it can be, but like for me, I succeeded quite well in sales. I'm the biggest introvert you have ever met. If people are like, you see you on the
Because you
talk.
have such a sparkling
I
personality.
know, and I'm not. I'm actually not. I'm very introvert. The times that you guys see me is the only time I'm communicating with human beings.
Mhm.
Outside of that, I close my doors. I have absolutely nothing to do with human beings. I'm actually a loner. And so I think that you can change if we address ourselves as a certain personality type and that limits us from what we're wanting to achieve, that's no purpose and it's not the truth because I know how to be extrovert. I know how to be likable.
Mhm.
My natural being is to be introvert and by myself, but I know how to be that other person on demand. I think that's the key. And that
Yeah.
means any entrepreneur, whether you're an engineer that created something and don't even want to, be around anything other than some kind of invention, or you're we're a salesperson to begin with. It doesn't matter. You can become the seller of your own company. Your thoughts?
I absolutely agree. I think that sometimes our vision of what a successful salesperson is, it's very, it's very 1980s or something like we're taking clients out for martini lunches and
I know.
golfing and, all these types of things. And it's very Mad Men, it's this 1960s concept. And, being extroverted doesn't hurt, right? Because you do have to talk to a lot of people you don't know, being capable of being likable and being charming again doesn't hurt, but those are also skills you can master, right? uh, I am an extrovert, and things like the pandemic where I couldn't talk to enough people, when I was able to get back out of doors, I was like a new puppy. But extroverts have to be really careful about talking over people or talking too much. Introverts can have an advantage in a sales situation because they tend to be very good listeners. And there is a misconception that sales is all about spin and all about being able to, to talk a lot. Truly true. Actually, I'm going to back this up and say, marketing and sales often get confused too. Marketing is kind of the ability to generate leads. Sales is the ability to close those leads, right? Um, Being extroverted in marketing can help. Like, I can walk into a networking meeting and I will just butt into a group of strangers and introduce myself, and then I will ask them all about them. Um, that's a little harder to do if you're introverted, but it's not impossible. If you're introverted in the same situation, you can butt into that group of people. Believe me, they're all there to meet people and get business too. They're not there for their health, right? And ask them questions about themselves. Because again, when you're introverted, sometimes taking the focus off of you and leading with Lori, tell me about yourself. Why are you here tonight? Right? Um, they're naturally always going to ask what you do as well. So you don't have to lead with yourself. I think that can be more comfortable when you're introverted. I think the one thing that people have to pay attention to is, if you do a lot of networking or having a lot of conversations, you can run out your social battery, and that goes into, having a structured sales process where you go, okay, I'm going to proactively spend X amount of my week, you know, doing sales-based activities, and controlling that will stop you, if you're introverted, from like wearing out your social battery and going, oh, I went to so many networking events, I don't ever want to do that again for 5 months, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
I love that social battery. Yeah, when I was in LA, especially when I was around banking and investment banking, it was
Lots
believe
of golfing.
oh, yeah, it was like you gotta have breakfast with somebody and then coffee and then you have lunch and then you have dinner. My social battery got so worn down, I was like, "Okay, good for this lifetime. I'll check it out next lifetime."
Yeah.
I had to comment on that. But I have so many things to unpack from what you said, but before we do, let's go into your world. You said
Sure.
you've been also in big corporations. Talk about and give us an idea when you were in the corporations, give us an idea of like one of them and what did you do in those corporations and how was that experience?
Oh, sure. A really great example that comes to mind is I was in the staffing industry. So contingent labor, right? People outsource employees, especially in manufacturing environments, because they're growing and shrinking and they need to hire temps, right? Um, and that was a Fortune 150. And there were a lot of things I loved about a big company in terms of resources. Most of us are small business owners and we wear 60 different hats, and we would love to have some gigantic marketing department to create flyers for us and all that. In a big organization, you get a lot of those resources. What I was doing there was running a business development team. And so my team did everything from cold calling on the phone to canvassing, which is walking into a business and saying, here's what I do. Do you use temps? Those kinds of things, to LinkedIn posts and of course networking events, things like that. But our responsibility was bringing in revenue, right? Um, so good thing about big company is the resources. For me, some of the downside and why I actually, especially after that particular experience, enjoyed working within smaller organizations was there's a higher level of control. There's usually more focus on the client experience instead of like the stakeholder experience when it's a big publicly traded company. Um, and You get to be more creative. Sometimes wearing a bunch of hats can feel overwhelming, but it can also be a lot of fun. You were saying in your corner, something about if it new experiences.
Yeah.
And when you're an entrepreneur, you can have so many new experiences, even if they take you outside your comfort level. And selling can be one of them. There's tons of people that never sold for their career that find themselves selling because they opened up a business, right? It's new challenges. I love new challenges. Those are fun.
I do too, and I think that's a beautiful thing that you just said that I want to highlight it before we just leave it, is that becoming an entrepreneur forces you, if you want to use that word, to be things you had never been before. But I think new experiences is what makes life rich. And I
Mhm.
think that for me, being a consultant my whole life was really to kind of hide the fact that I get bored so quickly and I meddle in something and then I'm like, okay, I'm done. Now I want to do the next thing. And being a consultant made that seem like it was a smart career choice because it didn't allow that to be seen. It was seen as being successful
We
instead of,
have some similarities
yeah,
there.
yeah, I like, okay, I'm bored. I figured it all out. The puzzle's not fun anymore. Where can I go to next?
Yeah. I've
Um,
finished that puzzle. I need one with more pieces.
I do. Yeah, I'm like that. I can grasp something really quick and I got to go on to something. I wish I always used to say, why can't I be, and I used to say this when I was younger, why can't I be that cubicle person that just wants to sit in a cubicle and get the pension and be here in retirement? It seemed to me like it was such a easier road and I was so envious of my fellow people who could be that person, but I also know that if I was, I would have just died. I could.
Yes.
And now I'm looking at it and saying, oh, I'm so glad that I wandered my weird pathways. It really has been much more adventurous because I love adventure. But I have
Yeah.
to go back to an interesting word which fell into where I wanted to go next. And that is the word that you're saying words I haven't heard in so long, Megan. Canvassing. Oh my God,
Canvassing.
canvassing. That was
Am I
everybody get
giving
out
you
of the car
sales? I'm
and
giving you
knock on some.
palpitations and like sales flashbacks. You're like, oh God,
Oh,
never again.
totally. And I think about canvassing, and people who were in the real estate business would do a
Mhm.
lot of canvassing and stuff. They had to canvass the whole area. But I haven't thought about canvassing in forever. But that, guys, that's like get out of your car, walk the blocks, and knock on doors. That's what
Can I
canvassing
tell you the toughest canvassing experience I
do.
ever had?
Please.
So this was my early 20s. I was a salesperson and I sold advertising to car dealerships. And so I would literally drive, to auto center areas and
Yeah.
go door to door to car dealerships with my copies of my little magazine. Like the internet had just come out because we could put you online and like autotrader.com too, and had to sell advertising. It was 100% commission. Now that's not the most fun. Uh,
No.
but cold calling like the some of the most aggressive salespeople on the planet, GMs of car, general managers of car
Yeah.
dealerships, was boy, that taught me how to negotiate. I mean, but it was painful at the time, but boy, I learned a lot. But yeah, it was also like walking into a frat, so that was interesting. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
love that cold calling some of the most aggressive people. That's true. Yeah, I did the same thing. I did a lot of canvassing in my days in my 20s. I mean, I was in sales until probably about 35. That was how I made
it pays the bills.
it did. And it was, like I said, a great career from that perspective. But what I want to do is talk about, and I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there, Megan, and letting you go with it. As we talked about canvassing and everything, and by the way, in your back pocket, we're going to come to structure and processes in a second, but we're going to put that in the back pocket. But
Because
I want
it's in my brain, right?
yeah, and it's in mine too, and I want to get there. So I want to let you know we're going to go there. But today's sales has changed so much, but it's still in existence as a need. And we have a slew of different people that I would believe would be in the audience, from somebody who is selling products completely online, which
Mhm.
still involves sales. I'll make a little notation what I'm talking about. Many of my clients that have products online have to call and cold call retail outlets and distributors to put their product on their website or their shelf. So they are
Right.
still selling, just not directly to the customer, to the
Mhm.
distributor, but it's still sales. And then you have a lot of companies that are services of some sort, consultants, therapists, acupuncturists, the list goes on and on. They're having to go to networking a lot to be
Mhm.
able to sell their services. So we have our entrepreneurs not maybe so much involved in what they would perceive to be the corporate sales world, but in actuality, if you look at the activities, it still requires the same outcome. So
Right.
here's where I'm going to go and I'm going to let you run with it. It's two part. It's how has selling changed and not changed, and what is the great advantages. I'm big into processes, and this is where being at Canon Copiers, I learned the structure of a sales process, and that was a fundamental that stuck with me. So run with this because you got a lot of great advice for our audience on what I just put out there.
Sure. I'll take a minute to mention when you talk about Canon copiers, process-wise, enterprise rent-a-car. Similar that kind of came out later, in and out. When you want to illustrate someone that has created a masterful process that they replicate across the organization, those two come to mind, but I'll go back to that. So how has selling changed and not changed? Eh, w- we continue to become more and more sophisticated as consumers. And when I say consumer, I mean that could be when we're buying lipstick, when we're buying a car, when we're buying something for the business, like we need to find an IT service provider for my company, right? Um, that can also, we can consume many things. So I'm not talking specific to, consumer products, right? Um, you know, and that's changed a lot because there's almost a glut of information, right? If you go Google, so I'm based in Long Beach, Southern California, right? And if I go Google IT managed service providers in Long Beach, California, I'm going to get a bunch of sponsored links on Google. I'm going to get pages and pages deep. You know, I can go online and look at reviews, which we now know half of them are advertisements. There's almost too much information in terms of how we make decisions, almost to the point of causing analysis paralysis, right? So you're dealing with a buyer, regardless of what that buyer is buying, that, is probably struggling now more than ever, definitely more than 20 years ago, to make a decision because there's so much noise, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's something that's really changed. Something that hasn't changed is honestly how much sales fundamentals still apply. Every few years, I feel like I see some webinar, some new book comes out with this giant headline that says, cold calling is dead. And I'm like, no, cold calling is more difficult, but it's not actually dead. Yes, we all get cold calls. Half of them we report as junk, but most of them we block and report as junk. We can screen our calls, we can do all those things. But the mechanism of having to get in front of people that don't know who you are, be it by the phone, be it walking in, be it at a networking event, be it on LinkedIn or on any type of social media platform, that need is still there. And a lot of the same fundamentals still work. And I'm not saying everybody should go run out and get a phone list and start cranking out calls. That doesn't work in all environments, but understanding that we're emotional buyers, right? Understanding that we should be, finding out the true needs of our clients and addressing those, right, in order to sell better. Those things have never gone away. And so, when I hear whatever's dead, or I hear people say it was so easy to sell on LinkedIn during the pandemic, now it's hard. I'm like, well, hard is a very relative term, right? Markets change, all kinds of things change, but difficulty is a very relative term. So I think that's what hasn't changed. Um, you know, and
I just want to add before you continue on what you just said. I think what's fascinating is that it is so hard to be heard outside all the noise with all the choices. And then I think one of the biggest problems is getting trusted because, like you said, some
Mhm.
things are paid ads and everything. So it's like being heard and then being trusted seems to be the two challenges I never thought of before in the contents. I just said it until what you just said. So I just continue on your thought, but I wanted to
Yeah.
add.
How do we differentiate ourselves?
Yeah.
Because there's so much noise, right? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for anyone who's selling anything. There's a lot of things that have become commoditized. Technology has made things like bookkeeping or payroll processing, or pick a bazillion things, more cost effective, right? Or more competitive. And so, those are some things I think in the normal course of business that we have to go, hey, I've got a challenge here. How am I going to overcome it? And again, how do I differentiate myself in this kind of over informed world? And AI is having a good and bad impact on that. Like, I use AI all the time because it helps me write emails or marketing materials or all kinds of things a lot faster. But I can't rely on it alone, right? I have to give it my voice. I have to, if you just put, you know, write a bio for Meegan Johnson into AI, it's not going to sound like it came from Meegan Johnson. It's going to sound for like a really cheesy vanilla version of who I am, right? So, anyways, sorry, soapbox about AI, but
No, no, and I don't think we can count on AI replacing our sales calls anytime soon. I just don't, yeah, I don't see that happening. It's,
no, I mean,
yeah.
there's a lot of use cases that are currently happening for chatbots. Like, if you call into customer service, a chatbot can kind of resolve some of your most critical issues. But when you're really pissed off, when something goes really wrong, a chatbot's not there yet. Maybe it will be eventually, but you want a human being, and that's where the trust comes in, and the differentiation is usually for a lot of industries, one of the key differentiators between me versus all my competitors is how much I'm going to pay attention to you, right?
Yep, it's
Um,
so true. The human, in fact, I feel like I'm hearing people say, I just want to talk to a human more than I ever heard them say. It's like AI
yep.
is going this way, and I'm hearing people say, I just want to talk to a human even more. Now, as you go into the processes, because I want to make sure we get this point across, is introduce Stratavera because
Oh, sure.
that's your new launch. Let's talk about your new launch because
Yeah,
that's
that's what I do.
build itself to the processes, right? So let's take a direction in talking about, okay, so Megan plays corporate America for a while, and Megan wants new experiences. We're
Yep, and Megan wants to do new
gonna new
things. That's
experiences.
why I launched the
We're
company.
getting adventure. So tell us about your company, what it does, and that's going to by nature launch us into the importance of
Processes.
yeah.
So, I said that you and I have that thing in common of getting bored or seeking out new challenges or new knowledge. I feel like anytime I changed jobs, I went into a different industry. I was always either in sales or sales leadership. That's actually kind of a fringe benefit of being in sales is it does make it a little easier to change industry because it applies all over the place, right? But I went from, again, early career in retail, and I sold widgets overseas. I went into advertising, technology, staffing, payroll, you kind of name it. And usually I made those changes because I was curious about something, or I wanted a new challenge and I wanted something different to do. And where was I going down the rabbit hole with that? Oh, talking about myself. So the launch of Stratavera, which is a combination of strategy and primavera. Primavera means growth and rebirth.
Oh, okay.
My passion is growing companies and sales, revenue generation, how that's structured, and then of course the support piece about how we shore up that growth is what I'm really passionate about. None of us go into business for our health. We go into business to grow our business, right? Um, but it's intimidating to figure out how to get there. You're doing a brand new launch, and you're the entrepreneur, you're the salesperson, right? You're the voice and face of the company. You're out there selling for yourself, in your infinite free time of running everything else you do in your business, right? So we start there, and I'll talk about how I address some of that in a minute, but we start there, and then normally eventually we run out of bandwidth to sell. The business gets big enough, we've got too many clients, and then we go, gee, I need someone in the organization to sell because I can't keep bringing in business and doing all the 50 other things. Well, how do I find a salesperson? Where do I start? How do I hold them accountable? Should I make their goals be, right? Those types of things. That kind of becomes the next challenge. And then, a few years later, maybe you've got a team of salespeople and you're going, well, we've done so well in this industry. I think we should be going over here and tackling this industry. Or you know what? I eventually want to move to Washington. I need to expand out of state from California into Oregon and Washington, right? I need to take on new territories or geographies. So how do I get the salespeople I have to be able to do that, right? There's all these building blocks in the process of how you grow an organization. And then of course things like a pandemic happen or fires happen or all kinds of other things happen that can like throw your business for a loop and you have to recover from, right?
No,
Uh,
I want to comment on the one you
yeah.
spoke of for a second, and that is the one where you come to the realization you can't be the only selling person in the company, and you got to put on the first salesperson. You know, Megan, in my experience in my private companies, which tended to be 10 million to 60 million that I would work with as a CFO and turnaround, that point in time was where they either made it or broke it. And I'll tell you why. They didn't know how to properly interview and hire salespeople. Then it took the owner to train them because they were the one doing the selling. So the owner actually had double the time because they had to keep up the sales while training a
Absolutely.
new salesperson. Then they did not interview or hire or have a proper, can I just use onboarding technique for the
Yep.
salesperson? You know what I'm talking about from that. So the salesperson ended up costing them all this money. They stayed with them too long because they didn't want to go through the pain of rehiring. And it ended
100%.
up, they got rid of them later after paying them a base salary they couldn't have afforded. I have seen this repeated so many times in some organizations that have been my long-term clients. I was actually with one specific, they would never hire anybody unless they had me interview them at the end to give the final okay. So
Yep.
for those in the audience that are getting to the point where thinking down the road where I may want to hire in a salesperson, it's much more of a skill than people perceive. Because if they hire somebody they like, it may not be the person that is best in the sales position. So, can you chat to that a little bit? I know you resonate with what I just said.
100%. And like you said, what we were talking about earlier, just because they're extroverted and charming doesn't mean that they can close business
Yes,
or close the business you need them to close, right? Um, uh, so yes, that piece right there that you bring up to me is the difference between the business plateauing and
yeah,
I'm just going to stay at 2, 3 million, whatever the magic number is for forever, or
right.
I'm going to get to 10 million. And I think I'm sure you've covered this topic plenty of times in other shows where you talk about delegating and you talk about scaling an organization. The same approach has to be taken to revenue generation. So I'll talk about so Stratavera, where I come in, is to address those challenges and those gaps, regardless of if it's someone who needs help becoming their own salesperson versus hiring versus scaling up into other territories. I come in and I function as a fractional, you could say fractional chief revenue officer, you can say fractional VP of sales, sales manager. I don't care what you call me as long as you call me, but I come in and create that revenue generation plan and the what we say KPIs, key performance indicators, the goals, the activities. Because, you know, I'll t- just to kind of talk about process for a second, I think there's kind of like three things that just are really kind of easy to remember is when it comes to selling, you've got to go from reactive to proactive. Reactive means like, okay, I'll get to that networking. I'll get to a networking event when I can. I've still got to focus on all this other stuff, the service of my business. You
Right.
actually have to come up with a plan and kind of hold yourself accountable to that plan, right? Be it you, be it your salesperson, whatever, right? Um, and there's ways to do that where it's palatable and it makes sense and you don't feel like you're, pulled in too many directions. There's ways to manage it, right? And to do it effectively so it's a good use of your time. The other thing, I think point number two is when you are growing, you've got to hold yourself accountable to that plan. You've got to have developed a playbook and all these types of things, and then eventually hold the rest of your team accountable to the same plan. Be that a salesperson that you hire, be that taking some of your customer service folks and teaching them how to upsell. Upsell is not a word that we like to use with customer service. We come up with something else because they don't want to sell. But for business purposes, for sales purposes, we'll call it upselling to your existing clients, right? But get proactive, create a structure, roll that structure out consistently. And then number three to me is that you have to use data. I sit with folks. This goes back to what, your conversation about, knowing if your business is profitable, right? And you and I have talked about this a lot. You can't make good decisions about anything without the information. So one of the things I sit down and do when I'm first working with a new client is ask a lot of questions. What is our, and we can get into the jargon like closing ratios and all this type of stuff. But if you want to put it in plain English, what does your average client bring you in revenue? What do they bring you in profit? Your product breakdown or your service breakdown, which ones are more profitable? Because we want to sell more of those so that we're
Right.
working smarter than not harder. Which product is the gateway drug, right? Like they need to have this, and then we can tack on all these other things, right? Having that data, how long does it take to close? How many people do you need to have met with 10 or 20 people to get to a closed deal? How do we create those benchmarks so then we can move the dial to be more effective? So
Yeah.
I think those are things I tend to, I don't want to say harp on, but I think are very important in terms of process. I'm always telling people sales isn't about being friendly and likable and talking to everybody. Sales is a process just like everything else on the operations side of the house. And if you follow that process, you will be successful. You can always tweak things and learn skills, and if you're introverted, learn tools to make you more extroverted so that you go to the networking event, but you still have to follow a process. And I'll end with one thing. It's, there's one of the old adages, sales is a numbers game. That's never changed. It's not a lie. It is. You can make the numbers work more in your favor if you hone certain skills and you follow a process, but it's still a process.
So true. There's a couple of things that I just wanted to follow up on tidbits that you said that were so important. Because then I want to leave the few time minutes we got left over to talk about one more topic. But when you talked about number one being proactive versus reactive, this is one of the downfalls of most small companies. They get busy doing the work and then they don't have any action for any sales activity whatsoever, and that causes the peaks and valleys in the revenue, and that ends up being a long-term issue for them. So that is so important on that. And one of the things that, I want to go into the sales is a numbers game, and you have to really hone your skills when you're a small company, because if you have to put a bunch of spaghetti up against the wall to see what sticks, you don't have the time to do it. You're not a full-time salesperson on
Right.
commission just doing that. So that's key. But then there's this other aspect that I just want to bring attention to the audience about our conversation in general, and that is you have like Meegan here with Stratavera and many of the guests, people who have been in their game for a very long time and are experts in that game that are now choosing to be an entrepreneur, making themselves financially applicable to smaller companies where someone could now afford to hire in Meegan to say, help me become a better salesperson. So this goes back to something that my audience hears me say a lot. To me, and I've been saying it for years, okay, but I always mean it, there's no better time than now to be an entrepreneur. When I first started saying it, I felt like technology was giving us more choices. Now I feel like we have access to seasoned professionals that we can hire that we would never we had to be a big company to have a Meegan on our team. Now we
Right.
can be a small company that works with Meegan without a huge staff working at her home and can afford to have Meegan come in as well. So I think the amount of information and resources that we have available today is fundamental.
Yeah. Well, technology has given us such a broader reach, right? I don't have to, your company doesn't have to be so big that you can pay for me to get on a plane and go to a hotel to work in Michigan, I can support a company in Michigan and do this virtually, right? There's just so many things like that that have allowed expertise, I think, to be more cost effective through technology than it's ever been before. Because usually, like you said, you had to be a large organization to bring in consultants
Yeah, absolutely. So
and to get the
as we
intellectual
as we
capital.
conclude, I want to bring up this last part. And the vein of thought I'd like to premise this is I think how it's no better time than now to be alive and passionate and exploring interest on every single level. So guys, you heard me say Megan's just really starting her company. That's pretty exciting as it is, right? But I'm going to just say this to Megan. And what else do you have going on?
I can't just do one thing.
Oh, what else you got going on too?
I'm nothing if not overly ambitious and a constant optimist. So the other thing I have going on, and the funny thing is, Lori, I think it's okay if I say that
Yeah,
Lori
yeah.
is my coach and consultant. And in talking about my business, at some point I mentioned buying property in Washington to open up a campground and RV park because in addition to growing companies, I'm passionate about the outdoors and taking my dog on hikes and hugging big trees and those types of things. And so uh, we just bonded over, Washington and, ancient home repair and being outside and things like that, and RV parks and camping. And so it's kind of funny because I feel like I'm scaling up my professional business, I guess, if you would call it that. But then I'm also making these plans for how am I going to market that business? Just because, it's not Field of Dreams. If you build it, they're not just going to show up, right?
No, no.
I'm creating an RV campground. I'm going to have to find ways to get people to know it exists, and my own sales skills will come into play on that.
Yeah, and so we're gonna have her back on. You're just at the process where you're gonna be on the land. I mean, this is just starting, and what was really hilarious about it is that I bought, some of you guys know, I bought a piece of property that actually 1 year and 1 month ago that I've been developing. It's a vacation property, and I was shocked to find out that Megan's RV park is about 13 minutes away from where I currently am located in my vacation property. I already been down the lot development thing. So I really am
Just
excited. We actually
very serendipitous and,
very
you know,
everything. It was like, okay, we're supposed to be friends, and here's the landscaper and the excavation crew that I used to get the stuff off
yeah, I'm
my
so
lot.
excited that you're giving me construction people. I'm like, yes, look, I'm already getting some legwork done.
I know because I
This is
saw
why relationships are important,
it
right? This is
is.
why building relationships and trusting people is such an important part of generating business.
As I've shared with people, it's like I'm in this remote area. I thought I was going to hire people. There was no one here, so I ended up buying a hickory shed and filling it full of tools and taught myself to use my table saw off of YouTube, which I wouldn't advise, but look, we're okay so far. So we're
You
still
still got
good.
your fingers.
All the
She
fingers are
hasn't shown you
still.
her toes though. She might have
Yeah,
dropped
yeah,
the
the
toes.
toes were gone, but
Yeah.
and I was telling her the other day I was in my van with a metal grinder and I was taking off these metal strips and I felt like I was in flash dance with this sparks coming over. I wanted to do like the little dance too
Get some leg warmers.
if I wasn't scared to death about the experience I was having at the moment. I didn't have the joy to dance till I was done. But anyway, there's a whole story in that. So, Megan, thank you for coming on. We not only learned about all the exciting things in your life, but got some really great nuggets about sales and selling and the processes and being an entrepreneur and overcoming the fear, and you don't have to be an extrovert and all. I mean, it just was countless numbers of bits of information. Definitely want to have you back on to talk more about the RV park development and all that, because
Happy to share.
that's a challenging business. And I did have a guest come on that actually own and run an RV park about a year and a half ago. They came on and talked about their RV park.
You're
So
gonna have
yeah,
to introduce me so I
I,
can
I
I can
do.
learn from them.
I do, yeah, I absolutely do. They're up in Washington as well. So with that, I know we've run over a little bit. Sadie, another one of those fascinating conversations, wouldn't you say?
I
Thanks for
mean,
having me.
what didn't we talk about? I mean, like I said, we need to maybe like do I don't know, I almost feel like it's a salon series, right? Where it's like, I think we might have something there, Lori, a salon series. I saw you light up with that one.
Yeah, you never know what we're going to do next. So with that, Sadie is staying behind as she always does. Extract Megan's information from the chat. Get in touch with me if you want to be a guest on the show or any request. Notice the surveys come up. That's our standard protocol we have to follow now, but any information, Sadie's making sure it gets back to me. So Megan, thank you for being on the show. I can't wait to have you come back on again. It's going to be another fascinating discussion.
You're very welcome. And I just want to say one thing to everyone who's on. Uh, if it feels scary to sell, if it feels intimidating, that's okay. It's new. It's supposed to be just like lean in, lean into being uncomfortable. Sales is about making the uncomfortable comfortable every day, and so is entrepreneurship. You're already doing it.
Yeah.
You're already selling. Just keep honing your skills.
And I would say so is life. I think we spend
No
too much
kidding,
time
right?
as humans trying to make ourselves comfortable. Get friggin' uncomfortable and have some fun.
Yeah, 100%. But thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I need to close out today. Thank you so much for the frequent flyers. I see all your messages in the chat, all the comments I said in the past. Yes, more tired and more broke. I saw your message, Chris. So thank you for the frequent flyers that are here every week. If you are new to the show, come back next week. It's always, always a fun place to be. So till next week, I'm Lori Williams and I'm your host of Small Biz Talk. Talk to you next time. Bye bye.
Bye. Alrighty, guys. So as you know, I hang out for a little bit afterwards, so don't worry, you're gonna have plenty of time to click on everything, sign up, get in contact with everyone. If there is something specifically that you don't see, because I know that with the chat things move, just let me know, and I'll put that right back in the chat for you. So let me just drop some links. So we had a little bit of activity at the end, but don't worry, I'll be here, and you got plenty of time. Just double click on all the any links that you want, and that'll just immediately launch it. And so you can sign up for any of Lori's classes, all that fun stuff. So here we are. Don't worry, I'm just putting myself on mute.